Hello, everybody. Welcome to the stream on Holy Redemption Stealing Palestinian Land by TRT, which is a Turkish channel. I realized on the streams, so when I shoot long form video, the form for this is larger, and so you can see up there. And I realized you can't see that in the stream, so I thought I'd show you. Had this printed out some time ago, and unfortunately, the mirroring is not right for the live stream, but you can see the logo. I had it printed on fabric. And so I try to hang it up there when I'm doing Palestine bookshelf review, just sort of floating in the background. And you can't see it, so I'm just showing it to you now. I hope you all had a chance to see this documentary. It isn't quite an hour. I want to say it's something like 50 or 55 minutes. Really excellent documentary. And once again, putting the focus on the West Bank, a place that doesn't get as much focus because Gaza has rightfully gotten a lot of our focus over the last year. But while that's been happening, while the trauma in Gaza has been happening, the genocide in Gaza has been happening, the Israelis have taken the opportunity to hit the West Bank in an even harder way than they have before. And it starts with showing us the Hilltop Youth, which was alluded to in the last documentary that we saw, actually. And the Hilltop Youth are these radical, young, religious Jewish kids who believe in taking all the land that they can. And an instance of this is very early in the documentary, the family of Ahmed Dawaseb. And settlers came, threw gasoline in the house, and burned the mother and father and a baby child alive. Ahmed has burns on 50% of his body, and we see him very briefly in the documentary. When the court case is held to prosecute, so-called prosecute, the settlers who lit the fire, they're outside chanting as the family walk in. Now, keep in mind, the family's dead. These are relatives of the family. They're asking, "Where is Ali? He's not here. He's on the grill." They're talking about a 16-month-old defenseless baby. And it isn't to talk about their martial prowess. I mean, who on earth would brag about killing a 16-month-old baby? It's the fact that these are not considered humans and that everything is subordinate to the Jewish claim on the land, which is given to them from God, so you can't argue with it. And if you can confront this and say, yes, this is what they're entitled to, then there's not really a conversation to be had, right? If you can condone that settlers can murder a 16-month-old baby, then afterwards make jokes about it at the trial, these are the people you're supporting when you say Israel has a right to defend itself. These are the people you're supporting when you talk about we need to stand with Israel. Those are the people you're supporting. Within the heart of that, and within the heart of this documentary, is Daniela Weiss, who almost at times to me seemed a caricature of the evil Israeli. There were times I thought, is she trolling us? Is this for real? Is this a real person? The thing is, I've read about her, and we actually saw her in the documentary from last week's film club as well. She's a real person, even though she strikes you, and she certainly strikes me as a caricature of evil. She leans into it, and at the end of the film, she's the one who leads a boat trip outside on the shores facing Gaza as bombs are dropping and pointing to how we're going to settle here. This is a truly horrible woman. And I remember pausing the video and just asking God to not let hatred grow in my heart. That hatred in your heart will consume you. It cannot do anything to your enemy. Whatever people will want to tell you about why they need to hold on to hatred in their life, that it ends up consuming you. It doesn't harm your enemy. You can sit here all day and say, I hate Daniela Weiss. What good does that do? It doesn't hurt Daniela. In fact, someone like her, she loves that. She would strike me as someone who like loves the haters, quote unquote. So it's hard, but it's important not to allow hatred to grow in your heart when you read about these things. It is sad, and I can tell you after 18 months now of really studying these issues and visiting the Middle East multiple times, that it's a struggle sometimes, but is really important to try to stay cold-blooded and to look and say, this is evil, this is criminal, this is wrong, but I will not be consumed by hatred. And interestingly, there's so many times I've run into Palestinians or I've read about Palestinians, they're not consumed by hatred either. There's a sadness, but even among that sadness, they're still able to make jokes. This is something I wonder if it's quintessentially Arab. And even among difficulties, they have a sense of humor, something I admire about them. Daniela also makes reference to this miraculous war of 1967, which the more I learn about that war, the level of delusion. How miraculous is it that you had a bunch of US weapons? How miraculous is it that you had US overflights from Cyprus in order to give you intelligence photos telling you exactly where to bomb? How miraculous is it that the US also let you know where the holes in the Egyptian radar were so that you could fly undetected? That's not miracles. That's just the US helping you. But it's important to the narrative for the religious Jew to say that God gave us the victory in 1967. It wasn't a dastardly sneak attack sponsored by the United States against a bunch of other countries that are my neighbors. It's God gave us this land and he gave us another opportunity to have the land. The man who killed the Dawaseb family was defended by Itamar Ben-Gvir. And if that name sounds familiar to you, he is now one of the government ministers in Israel. At the time, he was just a lawyer for one of these hilltop youth, very involved. And at a wedding in which a picture of the baby, keep in mind, this is a dead Palestinian child. And these are the people who tell us that everything about Judaism is wonderful and Israel's about God, etc. There is a picture of a dead baby. They are stabbing it with knives. Ben-Gvir is videotaped smiling in the background of this wedding. Do you think that he would disavow that? And we have a brief interview with Zvi Sukkot, who is a member of the Knesset. So we're in the West, we're used to hearing of MPs or representatives. They're MKs in Israel, members of the Knesset. And the interviewer says, how do you feel about what the hilltop youth are doing? He says, I have no problem with the violence. And he takes us to the settlement. We have other people who take us to their settlements, and they show the process of how they take hilltops. They put some chairs there, and they use that as a place to overlook and threaten the Palestinians. And then their staging areas, he keeps asking the person not to film. I think the person has a secret camera, but he also continues to film, even in defiance of the Israeli person saying, please don't film. And it's because the outposts, these places where they are trying to extend settlements, are illegal under Israeli law. But, I mean, they're not... the settlements are opposed to international law, but we know that Israel doesn't care about that because they're superior racially and nothing else matters because God gave us the land. So that aside, even under Israeli law, the outposts for these settlements are illegal. But it just shows you that when a country has a larger agenda, it will disobey its own laws. It will disregard the truth. And so it is illegal for the US to sell weapons to someone who is going to use it for a genocide. It's illegal by US law, and yet it's done. What does that tell you? It tells you that the US doesn't care about its law when it has an agenda. It's the same thing. Outposts are illegal even under Israeli law, but none of them are arrested. The outposts are not destroyed, etc. And we have the settlers talking about the fact that the Palestinians can leave. And this actually came up in a comment from one of the actually the members of the channel, someone who's supporting the work. Thank you very much for that. And I would encourage some of the rest of you, if you're interested in supporting my work, think about joining my Patreon or becoming a YouTube member. But the person asked why other countries were not more welcoming to the Palestinians. I think, first of all, there are countries who do welcome Palestinians. And the Israelis say people can go to Egypt, they can go to Jordan, they can go to Lebanon, they can go to Qatar, they can go to Yemen, they can get out. And that's the goal of this pressure that the settlers are putting. They can't have, despite everything, they cannot have the world press taking videos and photos of Palestinians being deported by trucks. They can't. They had those from 48, but they haven't repeated that since then because they know it's too quote unquote unacceptable. I don't know why. I think they could do it now and nobody would stop them. But the idea is they want to put this pressure on so that they will leave. The issue is the Palestinians know that if they leave, they'll disappear. Yes, they may survive and their bloodline may survive in other countries, but Hassan Kanafani very famously has in a short video in which he's being interviewed by an Australian journalist, he says, well, they said, don't you think this would be better? He says, maybe to you, but for us, being able to live on our land and have basic human rights is as important as life itself. And I think that is worth considering, that if the Palestinians wanted to leave, they can, right? In many places outside of Gaza. In Gaza, they're trapped. But in many other places, some Palestinians have chosen to leave. And that's up to them. There's no moral judgment on Palestinians for refusing to stay. But the principle of sumud and holding on to the land no matter what, including up to death, is preferable to many people. And as articulated by Hassan Kanafani, that they would rather die on their land than thrive and survive in some other part of the world. That's up to them. There's no right answer here. So I find myself conflicted because yes, I would like, and I've supported crowdfunders for people to leave Gaza, even though it's easy for me to say, with running water and food and transportation, it's easy for me to say, well, I want you to adhere to sumud and stay on the land. Very easy for me to say. There's no consequences for me. In fact, it's silly for me to even have an opinion about it. But what I am saying is I respect that some Palestinians would rather die on their land in the condition that they're in than thrive and have quote unquote freedom in a country that's not theirs. And that's something that I think as moderns is very difficult for us to understand, that very famously in Rome, there was the punishment of death or exile. And we hear it, I think it's even in the Dark Knight Returns. So as this kangaroo court is being run by the Cillian Murphy character, the Scarecrow, he says, death or exile. He says, you're gonna have to drag us onto that ice. And some people would choose death rather than exile. It would be preferable for them to be dead than to live away from their family, their land, their city. As moderns, I think many of us are detached from that. We're detached from the love of the land, the attachment to the land. And that's something that Palestinians already had prior to the Nakba, but it has only become, in a sense, militarized within them, that they are going to hold on to the land no matter what, even if they get killed, because that's the last thing they can do. That's the last act of resistance they can have, is to give up their life for their land. But they're not going quietly, which is what the settler project is: to surround, to choke off any possibility of a Palestinian state, and to harass people and kill them and traumatize them and force them to leave. And they just didn't count on the Palestinians resisting as much as they have. And we see quotes. I wrote some of them down. We have people in IDF uniform saying, "Death to Arabs. I spit on Palestine. I feel happy when I see images of Gaza." So these are the people that you're supporting if you say we must stand with Israel and Israel has a right to defend itself. What you're really saying is Israel has a right to attack and murder 16-month-old babies. And I'd like to say that the Waseb's case is some isolated case. It's not. If you read Amira Haas, if you read, I've given reference to some of that memoir within the Stephen Heiner, my main channel, when I started this project last year. So there's numerous evidence. There's evidence of it within books, but if you just read the press, there's all sorts of situations in which children are targeted. And in fact, there's a very difficult part of this documentary where you see children clearly frightened, clearly scared. And I'm saying kids under the age of 10 being dragged away, and they're scared. And we know, and I'll talk about it in a future review because I haven't had a chance to review it yet. But we know that this is B'Tselem's report on the prisons in Israel. We know that those children are probably going to be raped, sexually abused. And that's the least of what's going to be done to them. And seeing that there's a lot going on in this documentary, and that's why I think it's so useful. I cannot believe that they convinced the Israelis to let them go around and film. I don't know who they posed as. I can't believe they actually posed as TRT World, the Turkish, unless the Israelis are so deluded by their convenient relationship with Turkey and the fact that Erdogan's a total sellout that they would think, oh, they're going to do a positive story. And in fact, what happens is the Nadav Wayman, who is one of the representatives of Breaking the Silence. We've talked about Breaking the Silence again on my other main channel where I talk about Avi Cohen's memoir, and he worked for Breaking the Silence for some time. Breaking the Silence is a coalition of former IDF soldiers who've woken up to the fact that they are part of a genocidal project and withdrawn themselves. And a number of people come up to say, you have nothing to do with me. You're not a Jew. And he says, why are you helping this evil propaganda? And all he's doing is sitting in the remains of what was formerly a Palestinian village in which the Palestinians were so scared, they haven't even come back to get the school books out of the school. They just fled. But he's participating in evil propaganda. Remember that for Zionists and for many Israelis, evil propaganda is what you call telling the truth. And this is a theme I keep running into as I alluded to talking about the USS Liberty. If you did something, just own it. You'd get so much more respect from the fact that you said, yes, I hate Palestinians and I want them to all die. I respect the Hilltop Youth for being honest about it. They're not trying to pretend it's about something else and it's really about peace, etc. They really believe that this is what they're trying to do. Whereas you have all these other lies and obfuscations because they can't ever just say this is our agenda. They have to lie about it, then they have to accuse everybody of anti-Semitism. But the reality is they are doing something immoral. Everyone knows it. And instead of confronting it and just saying, yes, I am doing something like that, what are you going to do about it? They try to lie and they say that the entire world has a conspiracy against them. But it's not the case. Michael, you managed to put a few things here. Druid and Hopi would disagree. Sun Tzu would disagree. I think you're talking about something I had said earlier. They are not the biblical Jews. And this reminds me, I'm working on a Substack article. If you hadn't had a chance to join the Palestine Book Substack, please go give it a look and see if you're interested. It's free to subscribe. And I'm going to be writing an article about the... I think Tracy had identified very astutely that I had a Hasbara bot try to colonize, try to settle our chat and try to distract us with a number of things. And it was actually really, really instructive. I appreciated the patience that most of you displayed with me answering a lot of the questions. I surprised myself by how calm I stayed. I usually get quite irritated when seeing some of these commentaries on social media. But when I was actually experiencing it myself, I think I was just trying to channel Zach Foster and other people I've seen very calmly dealing with these objections. But I'm going to be writing an entire Substack talking about each objection and how they provide us avenues into a way that Zionists will try to hijack conversations and talk about lots of different things. So even, for example, at one point, he tried to say, well, Islam's only been around 1400 years. And I said, well, whoa, when did we start talking about religions in terms of each other? And it's all about distraction. When you get them on one point, they move on to the next thing. And when I pointed out that anti-Semitism equaling anti-Zionism doesn't make sense because one is a political movement and one is a race or a religion, they just moved on to the next thing. So if you haven't seen that, the term fun comes to mind for me, but it may have been irritating to some of you. Alex, you handled that well. Well, thanks, Alex. There's a first time for everything. Cruz, I think it's a shame when studying raw history makes one bitter. Studying this stuff has forced me to think like a philosopher, even how to balance energy within myself when facing reality. It's freeing. Yeah, Cruz, I've talked about this on different book reviews, but there are times I have to put the book down. It's really difficult to keep reading about the murder and torture of people, and even worse that they're claiming that it's their divine right to do so. Um, it's it's important to try to keep balance, and as I said earlier in the stream, I ask God to not let hate grow in my heart. It will not hurt my enemy. It will only destroy me. I could forgive Israel for things they have done in the past to set up a Jewish state. The main is things they are doing now. Leo, I would challenge you a bit on that. The question is about setting up a state is that you can do that in cooperation with a number of people. There are always people, if we think about this in terms of, let's look at something a lot less challenging, like in the United States or in different countries and states try to attract investment, and they will say, we'll give you some tax benefits, we're going to buy this land for you, we're going to sponsor some of your workers, whatever it might be. That people create incentives, but they're the ones who are welcoming you in. And so it was discussed, although it wasn't very popular, that Uganda and Argentina could have been places for the Jewish state. And in both of those cases, the idea was we're going to buy some land and a bunch of Jews are going to live there. There's nothing wrong with that project. There's nothing immoral about that project. The problem with what you're saying here is I could forgive Israel for what they have done in the past to set up a Jewish state. What you're saying is I'm okay with Israel going to a place where people already have lived for centuries, in which they are the majority owners of the land, they're the majority population, but I'm going to get a colonial sponsor to help me set up a state and dispossess and take away rights from the native population. I don't see how that's forgivable, Leo. And so I would challenge you to maybe look more in depth at the origin of the state of Israel and to say, if the question was about Jews wanting to live there, they were already living there. They've been living there since the first century AD. The question is around Zionism and the idea of Jewish supremacy, in which they have to have their own land. What other religion says that we have to have our own country in which our people are superior and other people don't have the same rights? And that it's our right to take land from the people who lived here because they're the wrong religion. There's a number of times I've seen that expressed, like, oh, I have this Palestinian neighbor, he's nice, but unfortunately he wasn't born a Jew. And that's their main problem. And I'm doing another review on Hassan Kanafani's text on Zionist literature and the amount of Zionist literature that Kanafani had to read in order to write this study. But it's a theme in their literature as well. We are superior to everyone else, and therefore we can't integrate. That's another problem, is why does there have to be a Jewish state? Is, well, we refuse to integrate. Well, if you refuse to integrate, that doesn't mean that we are going to give you land from some other people to take over. And I think that's a real problem. Sailor, I'm glad you watched the film, Jerry. It's an important documentary, and it's brand new. I think it just came out 5-6 months ago. Cruz says last week's was really fun. Yeah, like I said, fun for some people, irritating for others, but thank you for everybody's patience with that. Yeah, the funny thing is, Cruz, he tried to come on to the stream I did right before this, which is on Building 7 from World Trade Center, and I spotted him right away, and I just said that, not today. So he was banned from my main channel as well. If one has not seen the old movie Gaslight, you should. It so sums up these times. Jamie, if you can put a link to that, if it's free on YouTube or if it's available to purchase, I think that would be helpful to people. That'd be great. Michael is saying there are 2 of the. Yeah, if you could put it in the chat, I think it would be helpful to people. Is this war aimed at dominating the Silk Road? I think there is an aspect of a pipeline that should terminate in Israel, an energy pipeline, but that's not the main reason, but it is one of the reasons. But we in the US have done the same thing to Native Americans. Well, Leo, yes and no. In the early days, there was this question. understood among the tribes as well, because the tribes didn't have some Native American supremacy that they're the only people who are allowed to have land. They were fighting wars with each other for centuries. So the Native Americans were not living with each other in peace. That's not true. Anyone who studies their history knows that. They had ideas of supremacy about each other, that other tribes were inferior to them and should be their slaves. This is unfortunately a worldwide trend. That has dominated us as a species, and that is addressed by the gospel. That is not an acceptable idea to have. And in the beginning, some of these treaties were actually honored, but the vast overwhelming majority of U.S. treaties with Native Americans have been dishonored. And the idea in the beginning of what the United States was is not what the United States is today. And you had different colonizing powers. You had the Spanish, who were conducting a mostly religious and resource finding expedition over in Mexico towards California. You have the French, who the French were not interested in leaving France. So you don't really have a large French population coming over. It's mostly trappers and fur traders going up and down, having relationships with the Indians, intermarriage, some of them converting to Catholicism. That is an entirely different project than a bunch of religious fanatic rejects being encouraged to leave England and come with their crazy ideas and no fun and strange work ethic and to come to America. Those are three different projects. So when you say America, those three peoples were not coordinating, and then there was a country that came together. But the idea that no one is allowed to move, I think, is a silly one. That wherever you live on the world, you own that land, and no one is ever allowed to move there. I think that's silly, and history would indicate that that's not possible. The question is, can you share the land? That should be the idea. Numerous people have not done that. The vast majority of people have not done that. In fact, I'm still searching for a situation in which people have moved to a land and shared it with others. What happens so often is genocide and displacement. That's just the story of humanity, unfortunately, an inability to share and love our fellow man. But that aside, I'm not pretending that America did something right. I'm one of the people who is considered anti-American simply because I've gone back and I've looked at U.S. history and I have problems with some of the things that we've done. I'm not disowning being American. I am. I mean, this is a flag of St. Louis back there, the city of St. Louis, one of my favorite cities in America. But I'm not disowning being American. But the idea is, well, America did it, so therefore I have to defend Israel doing it. I think is specious at best. All right. Any other comments on the documentary? Any other questions you might have? Otherwise, I will let you all go, and we will get to talk again after Christmas. I'll get you what films we'll be watching for next week and heading into the new year. It's a really important documentary to watch. I strongly encourage, if you hadn't had a chance to see it prior to the live stream, I hope that I've encouraged you to see it by the live stream. I think people tried to put the link in here for gaslighting, but I don't see it. Jamie or Michael, if you can, after the live stream ends, could you maybe just go to the comment section and try to add it there? And that will be helpful. Religious states are never a good idea. Obviously, I disagree with that. But the tone, and I don't know how else to interpret it, is the idea that religion is the problem. But the idea that states exist in a secular way is new. That is extremely new in human history, and it hasn't worked out well. The secular states are what led us into World War II, not religious states. Most of the murder and most of the death in the world has happened because of secular so-called liberal democracies. Those were not religions. Those were not religious states that brought you those wars. So there's the idea of, okay, religion's this separate thing. It's a private thing for an individual, when it's the idea that it's something that consumes someone's entire life. A state is sort of an accident that's created from people living together, and that state only exists as a function of their culture and their religion. Whereas in the modern conception, the state is the first thing and it's the only authority, and everything else is subordinate to that. The family, religions, organizations. But that's a crazy idea. And it's a new one too. It's one that comes from the disgusting French Revolution and all the stupid ideas that came from that. But prior to that, even going back to the Romans, to the Greeks, to the Egyptians, religion is an entirely normal impulse within humanity, and it's thus expressed within its culture, within its politics. It's completely unnatural to say religion doesn't exist or it has no place in society, and we're going to try to create a society in which we marginalize or exclude religion from public life, and we tell people that the state is the sole authority. We are watching what is happening now, and it's not pretty. But it started earlier. Non-religious people have no power. I don't know your I don't know what that means. When you talk about power, the idea is that, again, in the modern secular democratic state, that people vote and then things happen. But we can see that's all also a joke. It's not a question of you or me having power. The only people that have power in liberal democracies are people with money. Those are the people that have power. Everyone else are just going through a charade of pretending that they have any kind of power. But unless you have money, you don't have any influence in secular liberal democracies. Whereas in states that have, and again, states, this is a modern idea as well. But if we go back to governments that have a relation to religion, they have to act in relation to that religion. And so if that religion says you can't kill people, and it does, that those people will be judged by that. And there has to be something beyond that. If you're just arguing for secularism, we can see what's going on now. Secularism is a disaster. And secularism, as I said, delivered World War II. I just finished Aldous Huxley's Ape in Essence. Have you read it? I haven't, ampersand. If you could put that into the chat, I'll make a quick note of it now. Ape and Essence. Okay. The US is a de facto theocracy. I mean, come on. You can't be serious. The entire US Congress is religious, whatever that means. In order to have a theocracy, you have to have a religion. You can't just say people are religious or people are spiritual. That doesn't mean anything. You have to have a religion, and that religion has to be in charge. That's not what's going on here. So because you have religious people, I mean, that happens in many places. There are many religious people in India. If you were to go look at the Congress in India, I don't think you would find many irreligious people. So once again, the idea of non-religious people having no power, it is an illusion if you think that religious people have any kind of power. It's the people who have money. Those are the people who control the modern nation states. And find out who makes the money, who prints the money, who's in control of most of the banks, and you'll have sort of other answers as well. What are you talking about? You're not being very sensible. What are you talking about? What theocracy are you talking about? Abortion is legal in a number of states. How is that a theocracy? Yeah, that's tragedy, right? If someone calls themselves a sensible streamer and religion has too much influence, I don't know what you're talking about. How is abortion legal in a number of US states if this is the case? Sensible, I think that you have not really looked at what modern secular so-called liberal democracy has delivered, and it's not successful, and it's not about power coming from the people, etc. It's just not reality. Many Christians are pro-abortion, but this would be like saying there are some mathematicians who are unsure as to the sum of 2 + 2. Definitionally, Christians cannot be pro-abortion. There can be people who claim to be Christian who are pro-abortion, but it would be like saying I'm a Jew, I believe in Judaism, but I also love Jesus. This doesn't make any sense, right? Jesus Christ claimed to be the Redeemer. He claimed to be the Messiah. And so the old religion of Judaism would have to be ended. You can claim to be a Christian, but that would be like me claiming to be pregnant. Like, I can't be pregnant. I'm a man. I can't become pregnant. It's not possible. I know that that's a strange, crazy idea. Religious people are split on abortion. It's murder. It's murder of a child. And even secular people, atheistic people that I've spoken to, they have told me that they think it is a child, which would mean that that falls under the laws of murder, but they still think it's their legal right to do so. So what they're doing is they're having a carve out for the illegality of murder, which is accepted by religious and non-religious people. But this means that the laws in a country are subject to the opinion of the people. But you realize how chaotic that is? So if we remove your whole like religions are terrible and religious people have no power, too much power, and it's a theocracy. So we go to a place where the the laws in our society are decided by the opinion of people. Have you not looked back at history and seen where the majority of the people have supported something that's absolutely nuts? What about trans women? I mean, like, don't get me started about that. Um, get with the time, Stephen. You too can be pregnant. Yeah, I identify as right. You can identify as a woman. And what's funny is you'll see actual people like J.K. Rowling pushing back on this. And the funny thing is, she's able to push back because she's a billionaire. She doesn't care what these people can't do anything to her. She's uncancelable. So people were pushing back. I think she's in charge of this new television series. I'm the wrong person insofar as I've never read a single page of Harry Potter. I've never watched a minute of any of the movies. I really don't know anything about it, but I do know about her. She's sort of a force of nature. And she is not having any of this trans agenda stuff. And they're trying to cancel her and it isn't working. And I appreciate that. Are you in treason of not earthly but universal? Yeah, I don't know if I've chased sensible off, but I think the point has been made that the idea that all we need is a lot of secular democracy is wrong on its face, and it's an absurd proposition. As I said, we're up on the end of the stream, and as so often happens, we go off into different topics, and I suppose that's the point of the stream, right? We start on one subject and we end up somewhere else, and I appreciate that, and I thank you for learning. Thank you for giving me opportunities to learn. I've got a book recommendation, and then these gaslighting 1 and 2. And as I said afterwards, if you have the opportunity to come back when the stream is ended and add those links, and I'll try to add it myself. Yeah, sensible. I don't accept the idea that the US is a theocracy. I find that crazy. General mutilation of children is supported by Western governments. Yeah. Again, this is, if there's an agenda behind it, the most horrible things will be supported. So it's not about human rights. It's the same thing. We invaded Iraq for weapons of mass destruction, didn't find any weapons of mass destruction. So now we did it in order to get women the right to vote and the right to drive. It's always the ability to change and mutate into something else. Sensible. Yes, I think to your point, unfortunately, the majority of the Supreme Court at the time of Roe versus Wade was Catholic. But again, someone acting in a government role doesn't speak for the religion. And I think it would be silly for you to say that. So 5 people on a court, they're speaking for Christians because they happen to be personally Christian. Free Palestine, from the river to the sea. And I think that's a good way for us to end the stream.